This podcast is recorded on Aboriginal land. We pay our respects to elders past and present and recognise that sovereignty was never ceded. Welcome back to the Radical Online Leftist Pipeline podcast. My name is Mitch Alexander, and joining me for this episode, really special and fucking cool guest, teacher, staunch unionist, the federal Greens candidate for the seat of Cooper, and all-round legend. It's Tara Burnett. Thanks for coming on.
G'day. Thanks so much for having me. Apparently, I count for 3 regular hosts when determining the balance here. So yeah, that's a compliment. I take that. Yeah, no, you've got this, and I don't know. We actually haven't talked about it, but I do. Your team has agreed that you will just do this show if you don't win at the election. So you've got something lined up after it anyway. Congratulations on becoming a podcaster at the end. Yeah, it's the arc of the universe is long, but it tends towards podcasting.
It tends towards content.
Oh.
That's the thing. Where would you rather be a Canberra living federal politician or a podcaster?
Purely for the improvement to my material conditions that would be made by a 6-figure salary instead of Patreon scraps, I got to go for the former.
So first thing I wanted to chat with you about today was something that covers sort of 2 of my personal interests. Haven't covered it so much on the show just yet, but I feel like conditions will necessitate it. But my 2 favorite sort of things are both, action on climate change and dunking on Labor. And so you recently, at time of recording, just a couple of days ago, were part of the Cooper Climate Election Forum here in the seat of Cooper that you're running in with Kath Larkin, who we just had on the show from Vic Socialists, and Ged Kearny from Labor. How were the vibes, generally speaking?
Yeah, it's interesting because it's not the kind of audience that I often seek out to talk to. Having been a Greens member for over a decade and having spent some of those years being a Greens member in Tasmania, that kind of room of people who for whom the climate and local environment is their number one concern, and mostly way older than I am, just felt like a bit like a branch meeting to me. And the other part of the dynamic was odd about it. I had this joke to when I had a chat to Kath afterwards. It's weird being the centrist on a panel.
Fuck. There's some Overton window shifts happening in the northern suburbs of Melbourne that no one was accounting for.
I mean, bless manifesting. We can make the entire country look like that. The way that I want the to go back to that 2016 Richard Di Natale line that made a bunch of us break out in hives at the time. The whole Greens being the party of the mainstream. I don't want to manifest that by us doing what Labor have done over the past 4 decades or so and shifting further to the right. I want to manifest that by virtue of working with socialist and anarchist and further left groups to just shift the entire vibe of the country further left to the point where, One Nation doesn't merit an invite, the Libs feel embarrassed to show their faces, and Labor take their natural place as the centre-right party of choice.
Yeah. That's something we talked a little bit about with Kath too, and it is cool with a bunch of these different, broadly left, broadly progressive candidates not taking the line that Labor do with we're the only party that you can vote in. There is this sort of vibe of just we're pulling you left and you're pulling Labor left. And that's the whole thing of electoralism if we're dealing with this. So being at this forum, because I've got weird things about, how you define left and right wing. I think that's largely down to other people. You are centrist there, except for, the people who like Ged Kearny, where you are a leftist and then the Vic Socialists are extreme. It's weird. But yeah, I think it's great that there is this undercurrent of people coming up in both parties just being we got to do this together. we're fucked otherwise. So we just need to go as hard as we can.
Absolutely. Look, when you think about the 2016 and the 2022 elections, Labor only won this seat because of Liberal preferences. I want to, when I'm in a position to win this seat, whether it be this time or, if not, I plan on renominating and hopefully am pre-selected by the local Greens members in the area. So if not this year, then in 27 or 28 when the next one happens, to win off socialist preferences would send such a strong message, not just to the Labour Party and to the rest of the country, but also to the Greens on a, can't be taking this for granted type of thing. Part of the reason that Labor have been so disappointing to so many people over the decades is that they've kind of defined being on the left as being, as long as we're to the left of the Liberals, it's okay. And I, am terrified of the Greens falling into that same trap of being, well, as long as we're just to the left of the Labor Party, then it's fine. No, we've got to have a more ambitious and transformative vision because, the people and the planet need and deserve that.
So how was Ged and the Labor talking points about their history, over the last term of government? They've been fucking shocking on the climate. But just for like a bit of context, if people don't know, even though Celeste talks about it an awful lot, this seat is one of, if not the most left-wing in the country.
Yes.
And on that, it's also, like you said, there's older people that go to these things. It's kind of like a branch meeting. One of their main things has always been climate. That's very like Greens base, heartland sort of shit. Above and beyond newer things coming through, it's always been about the environment. So you can't really bullshit people in that seat specifically. But how was sort of Ged towing the line of Labor while also trying to be progressive? And how were people sort of taking her message and taking your message as well?
Yeah, I think that my read on how Ged approached it was she took two kind of approaches. One is, and from talking to a lot of these, community environment focused groups, I've met with them. A lot of them I know just through broader involvement in the enviro activist movement. Is that this idea of access is something that a lot of them very much prioritize, right? This idea that if you have a voice in the room, then that is inherently a powerful thing, regardless of, whether that voice has the ability to shift things. And I think that that's led to some traps for a lot of the broader environmental movement, particularly a lot of the let's say a lot of the ones that prioritize a more kind of respectability sort of angle to it, less of the direct action types. I think that the other thing was just lying through the teeth. There's this, Ged came out and said, actually, there's so much misinformation around climate, which is true. But apparently, Labor's version of what misinformation about climate is people saying things about our record that we don't like to hear and saying, well, actually, the Labor Party hasn't opened any new coal or gas projects. Some of them were reframed as, they're just extensions of existing ones. Some of them are reapprovals and some of them are blah, blah, blah. And then, didn't get anywhere close to naming all of them. But, a lot of trumpeting around the tinkering around the edges that's been done. And a lot of, she leaned a lot, and I can completely understand why, on the point that, hey, there's been a lot of damage done. It's going to take a long time to turn this around. And, Kath and I both said, yes, that's true. But in order to stop a vehicle and turn it around, you need to, put on the brakes and turn the steering wheel. You need to not be putting your foot further down on the accelerator, which is what this government has been doing. And the emissions data bears that out.
Yeah. Yeah. And did you find what was the vibe of the crowd on Ged's messages like that versus yours and Kath's, presumably?
This This is where I think that that many election forums, particularly in 20s Melbourne, right, in this post-pandemic thing where everybody knows that if they want information, they can just go and find it online, whatever. Not as many people turn out. In fact, it's surprised quite a lot of people that I've talked to that this is actually the only Cooper forum at all this election, unless someone wants to try and coordinate one in the last 2 and a bit weeks, in which case, good luck, fellas. Yeah. Most people who turned up the way that you turn up to a footy game. You turn up to cheer on your team. You're not there because you're curious about how this game is going to turn out. Most people there, I am willing to bet, knew who they thought was going to do best when they came in. Right. And so, I think everyone on that panel had a bit of a question of like, well, who are we really speaking to? And well, we know that the answer is that we are really speaking to the coordinators behind these climate groups, that it's going to be, a pretty big insult to them if we don't bother turning out. I am not sure how many undecided votes there were. There were some lines that, got more of a reaction than others, from all three of us, positive and negative. But I could also, you can pick out the cheer squads in the crowd.
Well, I mean, I guess it's good then to come on such a partisan podcast afterwards and really get your message out. So thanks for coming on today. No, I think this will hit. Hopefully, or what I'm trying to do here is always to counter the shit that gets out. Other people have platforms. Anything that's shareable, anything that gets messages out there is good.
It targets my favourite sort of swing voter to chat to, which is the Greens Victorian Socialist swing voter, because we know that we're already across the values. It's just a question of execution.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So, I mean, on that then, what's the main difference in execution?
Sure. If I'm going to point to one, it's that level of long-term and national coordination as part of a broad project, right? Because I am a socialist, people have asked me why I'm not running with the Victorian Socialists, which I think is a fair question. Firstly, that, I was a member of the Greens before the Victorian Socialists even existed. And the other part of it, I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that I, and I was involved in, and my God forgive me for saying this, activism on campus, which is just a nice way of saying I put myself through a bit of stew pole. I have regrets about this.
At least you offer a confession here.
Yeah. And so that, gave me a high degree of caution about some of the ways that Socialist Alternative operates, and also that, there were frequent kind of high horse moments of, the Greens are always going to be tainted because they engage in electoral politics, unlike the Socialist Alternative. And then 2018 happened. And that's raised questions for me about, the willingness to compromise and to cut deals, because I saw a lot of really, really dirty deals done with Labor right and with the Liberals by Zelda on campus. But I don't want to re-engage into those old wounds. It's just this. I know that in the Greens we have some not just sound but increasingly sound democratic processes for members having a say that don't exist in other parties, and that we can provide a national approach. The same reason that, a more common question I get is, why aren't you running as an independent? Because, obviously it's very on trend to be an indie. You've got this whole Teal thing. Teal sort of ish candidates are now running in Labor seats, as we saw in Freo in the WA state election, and she's now running for the federal seat of Freo in a couple of weeks. And there's only so much accountability one can have as an independent. There's only so much one can achieve. Part of the Greens, there are policy areas that I have very little personal expertise on, or that worse still, I have just enough personal expertise on to Dunning-Kruger myself into thinking I know what's going on. But being part of a broad national party gives me the opportunity to draw on that expertise and to be like, Drug policy, I am not an expert in this, but we have people in our party who are. We have connections with professional organizations who can advocate for it. And so I can amplify the voices of people who know what they're about. And also, you name me a single independent who's been successful without bonkers money coming into their campaign.
Yeah.
I don't have bonkers money. I'm a public school teacher.
Who was the independent in Sydney where they tried to parachute Christina Kershaw-Keneally in?
Daly.
Yeah, because she wasn't teal. She wasn't funded by the Climate 200. But did she have a lot of dark money?
I know that she had profile. I think there was. I'm not sure whether she was a councillor or had run for council. But she had profile from that. I know that money started turning up during the campaign.
Yeah.
Not 100. Don't ask me off the top of my head from where. But yeah, that one hit a little bit different because of the quite specific circumstances on the ground.
Yeah.
You know,
which is also to say, like, I've not heard much from her in the national press since. No. Like, so there is a limit to what each individual independent, like you said, can do. Whereas like a voting bloc, like I think that's the reason why One Nation is One Nation, because since the 90s, the idea has always been to create a bloc on the right, as opposed to just being Pauline Hanson, doing her best to ruin the country. Like there is something to a collective in a democratic system with parties. Like that's just what we deal with. So yeah, there's an efficacy at least.
There is, and that's why we see most One Nation MPs leave the party within their first term that they're elected, because it's never not going to be the Pauline show. And I think it's going to be very, very odd. Like, because I don't think that retirement is really an option for Pauline. I think it's going to be a very interesting and open question of like, what happens when she dies?
Yeah.
Other than, people chucking manies down High Street blasting Crab Rave.
I feel like it will just be like, the collapse of a mid-century European monarch, where all the little petty fiefdoms sort of break up the One Nation party into 17 different parties who are all claim to be the one true king of like the One Nation brand. Like I think it'll just be that sort of thing.
One Nation, the real One Nation, the provisional One Nation, One Nation brackets Marxist-Leninist.
One Nation alternative, One Nation alliance. So enough with the socialist bashing. I do it too much. It's too easy. But enough with the socialist bashing. Let's hit the Greens bashing. So you mentioned something that set you off in hives, which happened to me as well, which was the Di Natale race to the center. It was that sort of the respectability politics that I saw back then, which was like after getting this, minority government with Gillard, there was this sense of just like, oh, we've arrived. And now it's time to basically do what Labor did last election. Fuck anyone left of where we are, and let's sort of glom through the center. Labor did it to the right, and let's start getting a base of normal people, and enough of the Greens base will sort of come along with us. And I wanted to ask you about this, and for anyone listening, this isn't an ambush. We talked about it beforehand. I don't want it to feel like I just got you on and was like, now listen. But this fucking AUKUS deal, this AUKUS proposal that's come from the Greens, fucking spun me out. It was genuinely like a weird, shocking, and kind of a deflating thing for a whole bunch of reasons that I'm sure we'll get into a bunch of it. But just briefly, in case no one knows what we're talking about, David Shoebridge came out a little while ago and was like, we should get out of AUKUS. And everyone was like, yeah. And he's like, we should tear up these contracts and we'll have billions of dollars. And everyone was like, yeah. And he's like, and let's put $4 billion into manufacturing our own weapons. And everyone's like, whoa, what? Huh? And he's like, yeah, it's good for us. We need to do it. Where do you sit with this? And I guess for reference for listeners as well, I think for interesting context, you're ex-service, you're ex-ADF.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of, I want to take this a little bit chronologically, actually. So yeah, I was in the ADF. I was reserve with a couple of full-time contracts as part of that during the late 2000s. I come from a very military family, and it was like, well, I'm dropping uni because I fucking hate my law degree. I no longer realize whether I hate the legal system myself more, and I want to shift things around. I'm also working at a charcoal chicken shop that is underpaying me, and I'm making up the difference. So I want to get fit as well. And I'm so deep in the closet that I don't even realize I'm there. But I know I've got to do something to reinforce my gender and to make my family proud of me. So
join the military. A tale as old as time.
Real. Yeah, it's a part of my life experience that is usually the most surprising thing about me in a lot of these green or left spaces. And it also kind of informed like a lot of where I'm coming from, right? Because I left the Labour Party while I was in the army. Not because of the army, because of the ALP. My family has a strong history of, particularly on my dad's side, of both military service and liking the ALP. So, both things made perfect sense to me as a teenager, particularly, having grown up in the Howard years and wanting to see the back of him and seeing the Labour Party is the best way to achieve that.
Yep. Kevin 07. We were all there.
I was out there. I kind of wish I still had a Kevin 07 t-shirt.
Yeah, right.
That'd be quite the relic. And it was this combination of disappointment with the lack of democracy in the ALP, as a member, and also disappointment how little, I was actually interested in changing. And during my time, I have like such a specific memory of this argument that I got into. It was at Karrakatta Barracks in Bootaloo, Perth, where I was stationed at the time. And, a fellow was being racist. I'm sure this comes as a massive, massive shock. And, talking about China and talking about how, we need to be seeing all Chinese people as a threat. And I was saying, look, if you like, we all joined the Defence Force because we care about, the country that we live in and our communities and our people, and we want to defend it. And I was saying this, and I was like, kind of like experiencing the weird fucking epiphany as these words came out of my mouth. I've been thinking about it. I'm like, the biggest threat to people in this country isn't any overseas government. It's the businesses in this country that are destroying the environment that we live in and making our living conditions so much worse. And that was kind of an after those words had escaped my mouth, it was kind of the toothpaste not going back in the tube moment for my political development. And so, that led to, after the army, I was like doing some other stuff, activism, covering different political systems, trying my hand at journalism for a while, eventually led me to the Greens. And so I'm going to skip ahead to like 2016 because, again, strong memory of like our 2016 election review. I was part of that process. So much of that whole like pivot to the center thing, none of our policies and only like one or two policy initiatives shifted there. It was so much about the messaging. And I remember it was Scott Ludlam pointed out like maybe 2 weeks before the election, we have read the room wrong. This is going to be the anti-politics election, and we are pivoting harder to the political establishment than we ever have. As the mood in the country against the political establishment, is stronger than it's ever been. We've cooked ourselves here, and he wasn't wrong.
Fuck, I feel vindicated. I remember thinking the exact same sort of thing and looking at like, I think even at the time there was the difference between like Adam Bant and Richard Di Natale, and being like, right as everyone would have been keen as fuck for Adam Bant, there was this like Di Natale came through, and it was a pivot away from sort of activism green into political party green. It is interesting to hear that it was very much how you massage the policy to the public as opposed to the policies changing, not even an internal push for new policies.
Yeah. And I think that's something that's worth reflecting on because this defense policy announcement, again, I think it's less about the policy than it is about the messaging and how it's been presented.
Mhm.
Part of that was was David Shoebridge's office and how they approached it. I wasn't in the office at the time. I was in the room for some of the broader policy principle development. But election season, initiatives generally come from MPs' offices on account of they have policy people who can do this, create specifics to respond to specific needs in a way that a broad overarching policy document as developed by the membership can't.
Yep.
And also part of it was just, you put this stuff out in the media are going to spin it how they do. And so there's, all these people's different reads on it that reveal a lot about the person reading it. And we've seen people see it as a complete betrayal of Green's principles and people seeing it as a culmination in a lot of ways. I think that, when you say, cool, we're going to take almost $400 billion out of this and put $4 billion into something else, people don't hear we're drawing down $400 billion. People hear we're putting this $4 billion into something else. This isn't, by the way, a creation of domestic manufacturing. There were debates, not so much in the Greens because the Greens didn't so much exist back then, but in the 80s, looking at the firearms that the Australian military uses, a question of there was a lot of pressure to buy them from America, and instead the decision was made that they were going to be manufactured in New South Wales. A lot of this is going to come down to that drawdown thing, and that's where it's like, I think that the analogy is less pushing further on the accelerator. I think that the analogy is, if you just slam directly on the brakes, you're going to give yourself whiplash, which in this case, I guess whiplash in the analogy is any country that has completely cut funding to military is asking to get couped. And I think that, particularly talking to people who describe themselves as revolutionary socialists, it's just a question of let's have a look at the history of revolutionary socialism here, mates.
We're going to use weapons in a revolution. I get the feeling.
More or less, it is. They tend to show up. They tend to show up pretty often. It's a matter of how are we going to slow this machine down as we turn around. And again, was not in the room when the decision was made. Some of the messaging has hit a little bit. I called it tomorrow when the war began coded.
Fuck, I was just watching that like the other night randomly.
Why?
I don't know. I think it was just on. I was at like a hotel and I was flipping through free to air TV and I think it was just on. I watched 3 minutes of it. That's very weird to have this coming up in my life. But sorry, why is it tomorrow when the world began coded?
I think a lot of people are seeing it as that way because that is how that's how the idea of defense self-sufficiency is going to be seen. It's going to be seen as through this framework of the entire last century and a bit of Australia's framing of its national identity as all this plucky little colonial outpost on the borders of the perilous Orient, and so. Yeah, again, I think that so many things in politics, it is less about policy and more about framing. And I think that so much of this is just people are going to read into this what they want to read into this. People are saying this is a massive departure, but they can't say what it's a massive departure from. They're not talking about what Green's defense policy announcements have been at previous elections, because a lot of the time there just haven't really been Green's defense policy announcements, or if they have been, they've been very abstracted. They've been we need to move ourselves away from the US alliance. This is probably the most concrete form of that. And the problem with offering a concrete proposal is it's going to have details in it that are going to rub people up the wrong way.
I feel like the big thing that it's a departure from for most people is the four pillars.
Yeah.
One of the last one is peace and nonviolence. with the last line being, the Greens are committed to peaceful and non-violent solutions locally, nationally, and internationally.
Yeah.
And weapons are not are violent.
Yeah.
Like, we can get into as well, if we've got time, the etymology of defense weapons. And like, that's a whole discussion. I don't think you can have defensive weapons. You have weapons, and it's how you use them. It's blah, 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 blah. But I feel like when you were talking about, like, it's the drawdown, and people are focusing on this $4 billion. Am I right in assuming that if Ged Kearny said something at the forum about how they're going to take $200 billion out of fossil fuel development and put $2 billion into a new gas project, you and a lot of other people like me would be like, just don't spend the $2 billion. Why are you putting more in? Because this is the thing as well. It's not a reallocation of defense funding. Defense funding is still what it is, and the policy isn't about shifting that per se. It's about adding $4 billion to current defense funding for this additional onshore manufacturing.
I think that if it was, we're putting $2 billion more into gas, I think that's one thing. But to say we're going to spend $2 billion keeping these gas plants running, or doing a gas plant here that is going to kind of make sure that workers have a spot while we're running these just transitions programs. Also, here's the money that we're spending on these just transition programs. That's another question. I think that maybe a useful frame is to think of this in terms of just transitions for defense, in terms of moving away from all of the money that we're currently spending on, propping up US arms manufacturers. And while we transition away from it, we're making sure that at least it's going into local manufacturing jobs.
This is another point, though, that I've not gotten an answer from any other person in the Greens. I'm not expecting you to know, by the way. This isn't answer the question. But what are the safeguards in place for, pivoting to weapons manufacturing onshore? And a big part of this announcement is that it's not for export. But what safeguards are in place, or could even be put in place, if the Greens don't have minority government next election and it's just left to Labor or even Liberal, who now have onshore weapons manufacturing? What's stopping them from pivoting to offensive weapons, quote unquote, or just starting to export stuff?
That is a great question, and you can tell by that stalling tactic that I do not have an top of the... No, I would love to have a top-of-the-head answer, and I think that goes... I think the only real answer to that is part of the broader political project. The fact that these things, in fact, none of the things that we look to solve, can be solved in Parliament alone. They require, in fact, the bulk of it is not going to be happening in Parliament. It's going to be happening in our communities, in the workers in those manufactories, even in the workers in the Defence Force. And a lot of ideological work has been put in, particularly during the 10s. Talking to people who stayed on after I left, a lot of these, it was a really, really hard right pivot after I dipped. And a lot of this was very coordinated, making sure that Sky News was the only news channel being broadcast in mess halls, right. Things of this nature.
Fuck.
Yeah. Because, soldiers are workers. You only need to look at the First World War to understand the impact that soldiers taking industrial action, sailors taking industrial action can have on the course of world history for the cause of peace. And thinking about it in those terms, right? I always think back to a Lee Rhiannon quote where she said that the most useful thing that someone in Parliament can do is to assist and amplify the voices and actions of the people outside of it. And I think that the most effective actors within Parliament can do that. It's just that right now the most effective actors are the ones doing it to amplify the voices of, the polluters and the corporations. I think that, that is going to be the most effective safeguard, more effective than any safeguard that could be instituted in law against that kind of pivot and export, is having the buy-in from the people who are working in those factories.
Yeah, I mean, so I just feel like at a primary polling vote of about 14% at best, I feel like it's too much of a risk, to be honest. I mean, and to take it to a extreme conclusion, let's go for nukes then. And let's promise to never use those nukes except in a defensive capability. And then let's make sure that we've got the workers that'll make sure we don't have nukes outside. Because having nukes means we're fully fucking defended. Like that's better than drones and shit.
All right, Australian Duce, let's fucking go.
But you know what I mean? Like that's my risk. That's my thing of like,
yeah.
And again, going back to this rush to the center that, you know, gave me flashbacks to Di Natale of like, is this going too soon? Because this is a thing, this is another, and I swear the last question on this that I wanted to sort of bring up too, is it seemed like this extra part of the announcement was gilding the lily, because this was a couple of weeks before Trump tanked the global markets with the tariffs and everyone went well off America and support for AUKUS itself crumbled. But it feels like this was put in as a sweetener to be like, hey, we should break up with AUKUS, and we're not sure if it's a fully successful or fully popular policy, but we're going to be doing some sensible shit around it. And two things for this as well is like, there was an announcement on the 23rd of January called End AUKUS. And the announcement just says this measure would save the Australian community $73 billion over the next 10 years. The Greens would reinvest these funds in social programs that help people during a cost of living crisis, like getting dental into Medicare, more public and affordable housing, and seeing the GP for free. And that was Jordan Steele John and David Shoebridge, with no mention of this additional sort of push. This other part to it is that Shoebridge said there's going to be more to this. You'll hear more about the policies on defense that we have. And that was nearly a month ago. And he was doing interviews yesterday that have not mentioned additional sort of policies, because I feel like the vibe has been like, that was a bit shit and you didn't need to. So do you think it was gilding the lily, and do you think there is a sort of pullback from this already? Or do you feel like there is a strain of the Greens that are just like, fuck yeah?
You know, I do think that strain of the Greens does exist. I think it is very, very small, but I have talked to people who say that. Obviously nowhere near as big as people who see it as a betrayal of the party's core values and everything that the party has stood for decades. I am not Mashui's keeper. I can't read his mind or know where the decision was made on that. I know that that more policy stuff might be coming, but that there may have been a backing off on that. I don't have the mind-reading abilities to be able to say what he was thinking in terms of where is the more on this coming? Did the more on this come and just not get any press, which is something that often happens with those kind of follow-ups. Things of this nature, which I know is unsatisfying, but... You know.
No, because I mean, I looked and I couldn't find anything. And like I said, he was doing an interview yesterday and it was just the same talking points from the end of March. But... I don't need you to, answer for him for sure. But in your read of things, people you're talking to, I know people have been saying that AUKUS has come up a little bit on door knocks and whatnot. But have you yourself from voters felt a push or a pull away from this policy is more what I mean.
The only people who've brought up this policy unprompted are people who seem to have a particular framing of it that's gone around, this idea of this is the Greens' rightward shift, this is the Greens propping up the American death machine, and there is usually not always, but usually a bit of backing off from that once that's, contextualized in a broader, it's more than just that headline. Here is the thought process behind it. And this is just always the trap of having a nuanced policy and putting it out there, is that people are going to reduce it to the most soundbiteable bit, and the most soundbiteable bit may be philosophically at odds with even the entire aim of what you sought to achieve. That's the hazard of political communication, especially over the last 15 odd years. Which, it's always been a problem, but that's severely exacerbated the problem. And that's why so much of, how we've tried to operate, how we've tried to pivot towards is around that, community building, having those opportunities for those, more nuanced conversations around things. Because people are able to offer much better critiques once they understand what it is that they're critiquing.
Yeah. Knowledge tends to help things.
More or less.
Generally speaking.
More or less.
You are campaigning as a visibly trans person in this country, and you have seen in your electorate some fucking foul is Australian Christian lobby pamphleting that's been going on.
Them and Advance.
Yeah, broadly anti-queer stuff.
Yep.
Given all of that, but also the conversation that's happening around the under 16 social media ban and the show Adolescence and you being a teacher, what's been more difficult? Campaigning or being a teacher?
Oh shit, being a teacher, easy.
Yeah,
easy.
yeah.
God, it's campaigning. It's absolutely hard work. Obviously, doing both at once was by far the hardest.
Fuck.
We like to talk. I know Celeste has probably talked at some point in the last couple of weeks about Section 44 and the racism in that. Another aspect of Section 44 that doesn't get as much attention is subsection 4, which says that you can't be a nominated candidate or an MP if you hold an office of profit under the Crown. And some digger judge decided office of profit under the Crown includes public servants, including all public school teachers.
Fuck.
Yeah. So people have literally been kicked off the ballot just because they were taking unpaid leave from working in a school. I had to quit my job to do this.
Fuck's sake. The type of people we want in Parliament. It's like, sorry, we want teachers there more than we want fucking lifelong careerist politicians. Fuck.
Exactly. And, you think about that and you think about the phrasing, like that's a particularly offensive bit of it to me is that phrasing of office of profit under the Crown. If I ran a business that got significant taxpayer handouts or grants, that is not considered an office of profit under the Crown. But if I work in a field that is experiencing massive labour shortages because in the state of Victoria under successive Labor governments, public school teacher wages have gone down by more than 11% in real terms over the last 7 years as the workload has increased, that is considered profit. But I would say that campaigning, it's easier, even though it's easier to switch off from, right? I will go out, I'll go to rallies, I'll speak at forums, I'll door knock, I'll phone back things of this nature. I get home, I've still got, doing a few social things and answering emails, which are coming through thick and fast to do. But I don't have, once I get home on a Friday night, I don't have 2 classes worth of assessments to mark and a week worth of classes to plan all by the following Monday. You know?
Yeah.
Teacher workloads is fucked.
Yeah. I teach at university and it's nowhere near as bad as, primary and high schools, but I know the general vibe of just oh shit. I want to say your identity. How are you finding, I suppose, the media, because Advance are fucking bigots anyway, and we know what they're going to sort of do. But how have you found the media's sort of tackling of your identity holistically, and how do you want that to be portrayed in the media, best case scenario?
Yeah. I think that we've very much seen the spectrum. So the first media outlet to cover my candidacy was Sky News, and Peter Credlin was having an extremely normal one on there.
Fuck.
Yeah. The trans activists will be desperate to get someone in Parliament, and if identity politics are going to play anywhere, it'll be the hipster north of Melbourne was, I think, her line. Whereas, on the other hand, I've been interviewed by other media outlets who've been a lot more normal about it. I think that because I'm far from the first trans person to run. I think about even just at the last election, we had Claire Garton up in Queensland. We had Dave Darko down in Tassie. But I am, I don't know what vote I'm going to get yet, but assuming it is something like what the Greens have gotten in this seat, going to be the closest that we've come. And I think that for a lot of people, it's been, and I've probably because I've drawn attention to it, this realization, not unlike kind of where we were with marriage equality stuff in the mid to late 10s, this realization of how ass backwards Australia actually is. Most people just assume that we've had one, and then when you point out we don't, most people assume that's a very rare thing. I tell you, Robert, India, trans MPs in the 90s. You look at Canada,
right.
you look at most of Europe, you look at most of Latin America throughout the 2010s, even in the US, at
Mm,
state level since the late 10s. And last year, one, she's got shit politics, but still a
yeah.
trans congresswoman at a national level. Australia, apart from a couple of local councillors here and there, it's never happened. Not at state, not at federal. And for me, it's very much that thing of partly I want to do this for the community. And I remember like such a strong thing of like after the Guardian published their piece on me, which it was very gender affirming because the first paragraph was just talking about how I look. So that means that I really am a female politician.
You've made it.
Then judge on my clothes and how I've done my hair.
Fucking hell, yeah.
Oh, look, you want to compare that to how their parent newspaper over on Turf Island does things. So I'll take this any day.
I mean, I want to loop back to Turf Island. We'll talk about that maybe in a bit, but yeah.
Yep. But like after that went live, getting these emails, these messages from support, especially from queer kids and parents of queer kids, telling me, oh, my daughter is so excited. You don't know what this means to my kid, things of this nature. And that was like the most energizing thing. That's like that this is who I am doing it for, right? Because of who I am and the life that I've lived, because of working in, professions like the military or much more dangerous professions like public schools, have developed, a bit of a thick skin with it. And, I can play that tank role of like, I'm happy to cop this, to cop this stuff because of the trail that it's going to blaze for people to come after me. And also like, man, if it's not me, think about what's going to happen when, the liberalizing instinct, obviously this pendulum has started swinging back the other way, but like, when rainbow capitalism becomes trendy again, imagine, right, we've seen a trans woman go for pre-selection with the Liberal Party. I know that there are trans people involved in the ALP, who mostly just, go on social media and get smug about the time that the Greens had a turf problem. The only difference is we sorted it out, whereas there's just, hang around without much noise being made about them. Mm-hmm. Imagine having some like careerist fucking hack or some pick-me-ass rainbow capitalist be the first trans MP in Australia. Our community doesn't deserve that. We've gone through enough.
Yeah. The first. I mean, that's also the thing I've brought up a bunch of times, but that the Liberal Party are the ones that brought in marriage equality. That's absolutely. Like, oh, fucking come on. A ball has been dropped somewhere along the line. So having like, the corporate Liberal Party trans member of parliament, like, shit.
Yeah.
That's, so talking about Turf Island again, which is the UK, like they just had a Supreme Court ruling that the legal definition of woman is based on biological sex. And Britain has its own fucking weird turf problem. I do not know what's wrong with the water over there, but they're extreme. And that was funded a lot in part by J.K. Rowling and her just weird crusade that she has, which I don't know if we've got as vocal a rich turf in this country, but how are you seeing, especially with fucking, again, door knocking and being on the ground so different to mass media and right-wing media. Yeah. But what's your obviously anecdotal take on the current Australian climate around all of these types of, queer bashing issues, I guess you'd say? Any sort of uptick from the right that they're trying to get on this stuff?
Yeah. It's, like most forms of discriminatory hatred, it's mushroom coated. That is to say, it thrives in the dark and it feeds off bullshit. It's the more people interact with queer people in their lives, the less likely they are to develop those kind of reactionary othering ideas. The less likely they're going to be able to paint every trans and gender diverse person as if they're this strawman caricature that they've seen on TikTok, or that a Liberal politician has put claims out about, just the same way that we see, with the areas that have the least amount of migration having the most strongest anti-migrant positions, right? And I've spoken to people who've said something that's like a little bit on the fucking and transphobic side, and then on the doors, and then over the course of the conversation, they're just like, "Oh, but you seem normal," and I'm like, "Most of us are, mate."
Yeah.
Right? I'm not necessarily even running as a trans person. Like when I first was putting my hand up, and I got pre-selected, and I was, talking with some people about, how I'm going to frame this stuff. I actually didn't really plan on mentioning it. And there was just all these people saying, no, it's going to be really, really good to draw attention to it because of, what that's going to mean for the community, but also in terms of just it's a novelty. Voters like a novelty. I was happy to just run as I'm a teacher and unionist, and I rent here in Preston. Because to me, that is the day-to-day material conditions. But more and more people wanting that. And if I was running as a teacher and unionist who rents here in Preston, that would still be, I think, a pretty strong base for a candidacy. This is just adding something extra that happens to be completely historic in the context of this country.
Yeah, because I've seen a lot of the reporting say you would be the first trans federal member if you're elected. But yeah, I think you're right. We've talked about all the different parts of your identity as well. I feel like the fact that you're ex-ADF, it has depending on the context, also is a very interesting twist on a teacher unionist renter in Preston. That's something that is, I feel like, where we need to get to with these conversations, and which the right don't want us to do, is to just have basically wrinkles in the whole person's identity, as opposed to, and we are leaving this, but you're this identity and you need to pick what it is and you run with it fully. And and maybe you switch every so often. So if you're talking about defense, you're the ex-ADF person. And then if we're talking about cultural stuff, as opposed to no, you're a fucking, I'm a materialist. So yeah, you're a fucking unionist renter in Preston. That's the main thing. And making sure that what's in the background of the material conditions is the plurality of identities. Yeah. That's the big thing, because what you have in common with everyone else in Preston is basically fucking everything compared to the ruling class.
Yeah.
That's the main fucking point. That's the main ingress into community building, is that we're all actually pretty much basically the fucking same. Any of these divisions are ridiculous when you get down to it.
And that's why the illusion of feeling more informed while not really being more informed, brought on by the nature of mass media in general, but particularly mass media in the internet and the social media age, creates problems. Because if your bio can't fit in a tweet or in a post on X, the everything app where you do your banking, then it obviously doesn't count. And it's a massive shock to people when it's just actually I contain fucking multitudes. I haven't, just done the one thing. I wasn't just put into a single identity. And that's where I've hit. I've some time in my decades. There's nuance. I've collected fucking, experiences and empathy spawned from those experiences. I'm rolling a fucking Katamari around that I'm just going to throw directly at Canberra.
What's been the most inspiring part of the campaign so far?
I've already talked about the feedback that I've gotten from queer kids and from families of queer kids. So what I got to say, and sure, this may be an obvious answer for a candidate, particularly a candidate with Greens, but it's the volunteers. Every time I go to an event, there's new faces there that I've never seen before. I don't know them through personal life. I don't know them through the Greens. They're just people who are energized by what the party is offering in terms of a transformative vision to unfuck some shit, and what I personally am offering as a candidate. And like, yeah, again, every time I turn up and I see that, it's just like, fuck, this absolutely rules. This gives just absolute shot of energy. It's so good. I'm not going to get over that feeling anytime soon.
Fuck yeah. I've said that. I've extolled the virtues of that on this podcast a lot, and we get a bunch of emails in every week where I will usually go off on how it will make you feel better doing that sort of stuff. You will feel less hopeless when you work with people. You will feel that energy. And people emailing in being like, fuck, you were right. And I need to tell other people that this energy is fucking contagious. It's like, yeah, it is. It's never not been. We are communal creatures. Like before we had language, basically. It is primal to get together and just sort of fucking just honk at each other and hoot and holler and fucking
apes together strong.
Yeah, exactly. That should be the campaign slogan. This last question then. When you win and get to Canberra, what will be your first focus?
First thing I want to do is full funding for public education now. We can talk about nationalising all public schools in a bit, but what the Labor Party loves to do is say that we have a timeline for implementing full funding of public schools. And then what they do is they spread that timeline over as long a time as they can kind of get away with in their comms. And then they make sure that it is backloaded. This is not them putting off the hard work. This is them saying that they will never do the hard work, because we saw this happen in the early to mid 10s with Gonski reforms, which some of us may remember, right? They had a program for how they were going to get to full funding, and they put all of the like 80-something% of the funding in the final 2 years of it, knowing that they were very likely to lose the next election, or that if they won the next election, there were significant enough financial considerations that they could kick that can down the road. And knowing that more likely Abbott was going to be in, which means that it wasn't going to get done, and they could say, look, it's because of Tony Abbott and the Liberal Party that we don't have full funding in education. Labor's recent, much fucking vaunted thing about full funding in education has it spread over a 9-year timeline. That's 3 or 4 terms in government. That is more than enough time for them to take an L, or for the economy to get hit by another GFC or another COVID or another meteor or fucking whatever, and to be like, I'm sorry, we just can't do this. That is them kicking the can down the road. That is them just admitting, but phrasing it in such a way that they can pretend that they're not, that they don't give a stuff about properly funding public education, that they take public school students and their families and their teachers and their support staff for granted. And we deserve better. Public school students deserve better. Parents of public school kids who are having to pay more money for optional fees just to get the basics deserve better. Staff at schools that have been massively underpaid and under-resourced deserve better. There is no reason why, and we've done the costings, we know this is true, there's no reason why we can't get to full funding next year. And then we can look at what going beyond getting to the bare minimum looks like, right? Because that's just to get to the bare minimum, and the Liberals are saying they can't do it, and Labor are saying that they can't do it for 9 years, which means they can't do it. We're saying, no, we can do it. And then once we've got to the bare minimum, let's look at what we can do to actually get the education that future generations need and deserve.
Fucking A. Hell yeah. All right. What is coming up, and how can people get involved if they want to?
Yeah. Look, in terms of what's coming up for me later today, obviously it's not going to really work out, but Vixen Workers, so sex worker organisers, organising a rally to get Border Force out of workplaces. So I'm going to be coming out in solidarity with them. In terms of protest actions, which I know is what a lot of the audience of this podcast love to hear, on the 26th, we know that a bunch of transphobes and their Nazi mates are organising another rally on the steps of Parliament. We're going to drown them out like we did last year. We're going to have massive, beautiful show of solidarity, not just from the queer community, but from allies. And as I pointed out when I spoke at the Translative Action Rally. It's always the Palestinians, it's always the First Nations mobs turning out, and that's always so gorgeous to see. Who knows? Maybe I'll get punched in the throat by a cop like I did at the last one.
Fuck.
But we're absolutely going to turn out and drown out hatred. And then, obviously, next Tuesday, the 22nd, pre-poll is opening. There's going to be a couple of pre-poll stations. We know that these days more than a third of people vote at pre-poll, so we're going to be shifting into trying to cover that. If you've got a spare bit of time, sign up, come down, help out. We haven't sent them to the printer yet, but I know that Kath and I had a phone call after the ballot draw, and the plan is that our how to vote recommendations are going to look identical apart from the first two being swapped around.
Nice.
But obviously everybody can and should do their own research and come up with their own numberings. But I reckon if you've got the values of this podcast, it's going to be looking something like that. And then election day itself, it's always a hassle making sure they're covered. Not even just making sure they're covered here, right? Go further out. If you live in the outer suburbs and you fucking hate life because you live in the outer suburbs or in a regional area, like I did growing up, then, just being there, those are the places where it makes the most difference, because you have the fewest amount of people being able to have that last little conversation with someone before they cast their vote. It makes a significant difference. So, if you're not doing anything on the 3rd, turn up, sign up, turn up, grab a snag, have some chats with people in your local community, hand out some little bits of paper, and then, watch Anthony Green's last hurrah before he might tosses over to Casey Briggs for the next one.
Thanks heaps for coming on. This has been sick.
Thank you so much, mate. Take care.
I'll just see what it does.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, it's pretty cool, but I don't think it'll work. Do you want to give us hello?
Hello, check. Apparently you can't have trans women around a microphone without it turning into a noise show.
Fuck. There's some gender essentialism going on here. I won't stand for it. Plenty of cis people are losers too. I won't have this.